This story contains themes of isolation and psychological distress that some listeners may find unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. It was supposed to be a routine EVA, just me and David. Miles above Earth, the silence of space was usually a comfort, a breathtaking canvas of stars. But that day, the silence felt like a shroud. I was tethered, checking the external sensor array on the stardust when David's panicked voice crackled in my suit comms. "Michael, do you see that? Over there, just past the solar array." My gaze swept the black expanse. Then I saw it. Another EVA suit, identical to ours, perfectly illuminated by the distant sun. But there were only 3 of us on this mission. Me, David, and Emily back inside the ship. Who was in the other suit? And why hadn't we been told? My breath hitched, a sudden, cold knot forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space. My visor, usually a window of calm focus, now felt like a lens magnifying a nightmare. Another EVA suit. Identical. My first thought was a desperate scramble for logic. A reflection? No, the angles were all wrong. Debris? Impossible. This was a complete, articulated suit, floating with a deliberate stillness that defied the haphazard tumble of space junk. It was perfectly terrifyingly there. "David," I managed, my voice a thin, reedy rasp in my comms, barely audible over the hum of my suit's life support. "David, do you see that?" There was a moment of silence, just the crackle of static. I pictured him a few meters away, meticulously checking the external sensor array. David was the calm one, the engineer who saw problems as puzzles, not omens. "See what, Michael?" His voice was clear, unconcerned. "Are you getting a sensor anomaly? My readings are nominal for this section." "No, not an anomaly," I insisted, my gaze locked on the spectral figure. It was still there, just beyond the glittering canopy of our ship, a silent sentinel in the abyss. "Look up. To starboard. Just past the primary antenna array." Another pause. This one stretched, growing taut with my own escalating anxiety. I could almost feel his head turning, his eyes scanning the same endless black. And then a sharp intake of breath on the comms, a sound that cut through the sterile silence of space like a knife. What is that?" David's voice, usually so steady, was now laced with a tremor I'd never heard before. The calm had shattered. He saw it. He saw it too. Relief, cold and fleeting, washed over me, immediately replaced by a fresh wave of dread. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't some oxygen deprivation hallucination. It was real. "I don't know, David," I responded, my voice barely a whisper. "There are only 3 of us. You, me, and Emily inside. Who else is out here?" We hung there, suspended in the vast indifference of space, 2 specks of humanity grappling with an impossible sight. The suit remained motionless, a silent, dark silhouette against the distant, brilliant sun. It was unsettlingly pristine, its visor a dark, featureless void that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. "Maybe it's a spare?" David offered, though his tone held no conviction. "A dummy suit for testing? Left over from an earlier mission." "David, we've been over every inch of this ship, inside and out, in simulations and in person," I countered, shaking my head even though he couldn't see it. "There's no mention of any additional EVA equipment, certainly not a fully suited individual. And why would it be floating out here, perfectly positioned like it's watching?" The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fear. The idea felt ridiculous, paranoid, but the image of that dark, unmoving figure was seared into my mind. "Emily," David said, his voice regaining a fraction of its command, as if focusing on a known variable. "Let's hail Emily. Maybe she has eyes on it from the bridge. Or mission control." "Good idea," I agreed, my fingers fumbling slightly as I reached for my comm panel, my eyes still glued to the mysterious suit. "Emily, this is Michael. Do you copy? We have an unusual visual outside. Can you confirm sensor readings or visual confirmation?" "Only static." Not even Emily's usual cheerful, slightly sarcastic reply. Just the hiss and pop of cosmic interference. "Emily, this is David," David interjected, his voice louder, more urgent. "Report. Are you seeing anything unusual on external cameras? We have an unidentified object, appears to be an EVA suit, starboard side." More static. A longer, more insistent silence this time. It wasn't just a momentary lapse. Something was wrong. "Emily." I tried again, a new tremor entering my voice. "Are you there? Is everything okay?" Still nothing. The silence stretched, amplifying our isolation, making the vastness of space feel less grand and more terrifyingly empty. Mission Control, this is Ares 1, David began, his voice now tight with concern, bypassing Emily. We have an urgent situation. Unidentified EVA suit detected outside the vessel. Request immediate clarification and status update on crew manifest. Our internal comms to Emily are unresponsive. The comms channel crackled, then a faint, distorted voice broke through. It wasn't the crisp, reassuring tone of Mission Control we were used to. It was garbled, distant, almost like a whisper from another dimension. Asterisk static asterisk. Ares 1 static. Do not static approach static. Maintain distance. The message was broken, incomplete, but the words do not approach echoed with a chilling clarity. My blood ran cold. Mission Control knew. They knew about the suit, and they were telling us not to go near it. Why? Mission Control, repeat last transmission. David demanded, his voice strained. We can barely hear you. What about Emily? Is she safe? What is this suit? The garbled voice returned, even fainter this time. Asterisk static asterisk. Anomaly. Static. Protocol. Static. Return to static. Immediately. Then complete silence. The channel went dead. Just the background hum of our suits. Our lifeline to Earth, to sanity, had been severed or at least severely compromised. They cut us off. I breathed, the realization sinking in like a lead weight. They're not just telling us to stay away, they're isolating us. David was silent for a moment, his breathing heavy in my comms. This doesn't make any sense, Michael. Why wouldn't they tell us? Why is Emily not responding? And what the hell is that thing? As if on cue, as if it had heard us, the suit moved. It wasn't a sudden jerky movement, but a slow, almost imperceptible drift. It began to rotate just slightly, its dark visor now angled more directly towards us. It wasn't a turn, not really, but a shift in its orientation that made it feel like it was looking. A new primal fear clawed at my throat. This wasn't just an object. This wasn't some forgotten piece of equipment. This felt sentient. Did you see that? I asked, my voice barely a croak. It's drifting, David confirmed, his voice tight. Towards us. And it almost looks like it's turning. We watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the suit continued its slow, silent approach. The distance between us and the silent figure began to shrink. Every meter felt like an eternity. Every inch a step closer to something utterly unknown and deeply wrong. We need to get back inside, David, I urged, my mind screaming for the safety of the ship, even if Emily wasn't answering. Now, before it gets any closer. Wait, David said, his voice holding a strange mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Look at its shoulder. Is that a patch? I squinted, trying to make out details on the dark, featureless suit. As it drifted nearer, illuminated by the distant sun, I could just discern a faint outline on its right shoulder. It was dark, almost indistinguishable from the suit itself, but there was a shape, a symbol. And then, with a horrifying clarity, I saw it. It was the Ares 1 mission patch. Our patch. The stylized rocket, the rings of Saturn, the Earth in the background. Identical to the one on my own suit, on David's suit, on Emily's suit. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of space. This wasn't a random suit. This wasn't a spare or a dummy. This was ours. It belonged to our mission. But there were only 3 of us. Michael, David whispered, his voice barely audible, the terror fully unleashed. Michael, there's something else. On the visor. I focused, straining my eyes. The visor, previously a dark, impenetrable void, now seemed to shimmer faintly as the suit turned further, catching the light from a different angle. And within that dark, reflective surface, I thought I saw it. Not a reflection of us, not the distant stars, but a faint, almost imperceptible glow. A light within the darkness. And then, as the suit drifted even closer, the light solidified. It wasn't just a glow. It was an eye. A single, distinct human eye staring out from the darkness of the visor. It was wide, unblinking, and filled with an expression of profound, unutterable horror. And it was staring directly at me. And it was staring directly at me. My blood ran cold, or rather, it would have if I wasn't encased in a pressurized suit, millions of miles from anything that resembled warmth. The sheer, impossible audacity of it crashed over me like a rogue wave in a vacuum. There were only 4 of us on the Odyssey. Jessica was right beside me, tethered, her suit a familiar white beacon in the inky black, perfectly visible in my periphery. David and Emily were inside the module, monitoring our progress, their voices a familiar, reassuring comfort in my comms just moments ago. So who was this? My mind, trained for logical problem-solving in extreme environments, tried to conjure explanations, desperate to claw back some semblance of sanity. A reflection? No. Impossible. The angle was wrong. The way the light caught it was wrong. And the undeniable depth of the pupil, the subtle shift as if taking me in, shattered that fragile hope. A hallucination? My vitals were stable, oxygen levels optimal, no signs of pressure sickness, no flickering lights in my helmet's display. This was real. Terrifyingly, existentially real. It wasn't just observing, it was pleading, horrified. A silent scream trapped behind a helmet. It was an expression that spoke of ultimate despair, of something unspeakable witnessed or endured, a profound terror that resonated with a primal chord deep within me. Jessica! I breathed into my comms, my voice a strained whisper, barely audible even to myself, lost in the static of my own racing thoughts. Do you see that? I tried to point, but my gloved hand felt clumsy, heavy, as if moving through syrup, unable to accurately direct her gaze in the vastness. See what, Michael? Her voice, blessedly calm and professional, cut through my rising panic. Everything okay? You're drifting a little. She hadn't seen it. Her tone was utterly devoid of the terror seizing me. The angle, perhaps? Or was it only visible to me? The horrifying thought that I might be the only one seeing it was almost as terrifying as the eye itself. It implied a breakdown in my own perception, a personal descent into madness, a solitary nightmare playing out in the most desolate place imaginable. No, I think I just saw something. I stammered, desperately trying to keep my voice even, clinging to the facade of normalcy that was rapidly crumbling around me. Another suit. Out there. There was a beat of silence on the comms, a microsecond where Jessica's professional calm finally fractured. Another suit? Michael, there's nothing out here but us and the module. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Check your telemetry. Her voice was now tinged with genuine concern, a hint of unease. As Jessica spoke, the other suit, still suspended in that impossible void, made a subtle movement. A slight shift, almost imperceptible, as if adjusting its weightless posture. But it wasn't just a random drift. Its head, with that single staring eye, tilted just enough to track my movement, to follow my gaze. It was deliberate, intelligent. Pure terror seized me. My breath hitched in my throat, useless in the sealed environment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of space, a desperate, animalistic rhythm of fear. This wasn't a reflection. This wasn't a hallucination. This was something, and it was watching me. My mind raced through the crew manifest, frantically searching for an explanation. David, Emily inside. Jessica tethered beside me. Me right here. No fifth person. No stowaways. Every module, every compartment, every piece of equipment was meticulously accounted for. This was impossible. Unless one of them wasn't inside. But then who was talking to me from inside the Odyssey? And if they were outside, why were they not communicating? Why were they just staring? The thought was a cold, alien hand clutching at my gut. Unless it wasn't one of them. The sheer, chilling implication of an unknown entity in an Odyssey EVA suit, out here millions of miles from Earth, was a concept too vast, too terrifying for my mind to fully grasp. It's still there, I whispered, my voice cracking, abandoning all pretense of calm. It's a suit, Jess. An EVA suit. And there's an eye in the visor. It's looking at me. There was a longer silence from Jessica this time, a telling pause that spoke volumes. Michael, you're scaring me, she finally said, her voice tight, strained. Where? Point it out. I can't see anything. Describe its position relative to the module, to me. As I fumbled to orient myself to try and guide Jessica's attention, the other suit seemed to drift closer. Not rapidly, not aggressively, but with an unnerving, slow inevitability, like a ghost caught in an unseen current. The distance between us, which had felt vast moments ago, now seemed to shrink. The eye, that horrifying eye, seemed to grow larger, more dominant in my field of vision, its silent plea intensifying. I forced myself to examine it to find some detail, any detail that could explain it away, that could bring it back into the realm of the rational. The suit itself was an Odyssey standard model, white with the blue and red trim, the mission patch on the shoulder. But it was different. Not damaged, not obviously malfunctioning, but subtly wrong. The material seemed duller, less reflective, as if it had been exposed to something that had leached its vibrancy. The visor, while showing the eye, seemed to absorb light rather than bounce it back, creating a deeper, more profound darkness behind the glass. And there was something on the helmet near the comms unit. A faint dark stain, like dried blood. No, it couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks. It had to be a shadow, a smudge. But the image solidified. A dark, irregular splotch, a grim contrast against the pristine white. It wasn't large, easily missed in the vastness, but now that I saw it, it was undeniable. And it amplified the horror of the eye within, making its silent plea all the more desperate, all the more real. "Jess, we need to go," I urged, pulling on my tether, trying to get closer to her, to the relative safety of a known, living human voice. Now, back to the module. Something is wrong. Seriously wrong. "Michael, what are you talking about?" Jessica's voice was sharp, a mix of confusion and growing alarm. "We're halfway through the diagnostics. We can't just abort. What do you see? Are you having a pressure event? Your environmental readouts are nominal, but your heart rate is spiking. What is happening out there?" She was trying to be rational, to find a scientific explanation for my panic. But her voice was strained, the edge of fear now unmistakable. The eye in the visor blinked. Or no, it didn't blink. It closed slowly, deliberately, for a fraction of a second, then opened again. And in that brief closure, I felt a profound sense of understanding, of shared terror. It wasn't just staring at me. It was looking for me. Or to me. It was trying to tell me something. Then the suit's right hand, gloved and bulky, slowly lifted. It didn't reach out, not exactly. It just rose, palm facing me, extended in that slow-motion ballet of zero-G. And on the palm of the glove I saw it. A symbol, crudely drawn or somehow etched onto the pristine white surface. It wasn't the Odyssey logo, nor any designation I recognized. It was a simple, stark image. A broken circle with 3 jagged lines radiating outwards from its center. It looked ancient, primal, utterly out of place in the high-tech, sterile environment of space. The hand remained suspended, offering the symbol. The eye in the visor, wide and unblinking again, seemed to demand that I recognize it, that I understand its meaning. It was an urgent, desperate plea. A silent message screamed across the void. My mind screamed in protest. This was impossible. A crew member, alive or dead, would be communicating through standard channels. Why this silent, terrifying pantomime? Why the symbol? "Michael, your heart rate is spiking." Jessica's voice was sharp now, fear overriding her training, her professionalism. "What is happening out there? David, Emily, are you seeing anything on external cams?" "Negative, Jessica." David's voice, usually so steady, had a slight edge of concern. He was hearing my panic, seeing my vitals. "All external feeds are clear. No anomalies. Just you two and the Odyssey." The symbol. It gnawed at me. A broken circle. 3 lines. Why? What could it mean? Was it a warning? A cry for help? A clue? It felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know existed, thrust into my trembling hands. Just as I tried to focus harder on the symbol, to commit it to memory, to understand its desperate plea, the other suit began to drift away. Or perhaps I was drifting away from it. The sense of proximity lessened, the eye shrinking, becoming less distinct, fading back into the impenetrable darkness of the visor. The vast, indifferent black of space began to reclaim its mystery, swallowing the impossible figure. "No, wait," I cried, trying to push off, to reach out, to keep it in sight, to demand answers from the silent, staring terror. But my movements were clumsy, my mind reeling, my body refusing to obey. "Michael, stop. You're going to tangle your tether." Jessica was pulling on her own tether, trying to reel me in, her voice now a sharp command, overriding my desperate pleas. "Come back here now." In the time it took her to exert that pull, in the brief moment my attention was diverted by her urgent voice and the tug on my line, the suit was gone, vanished, swallowed by the black. No trace, no lingering glow, nothing. Only the vast, silent, indifferent void remained. And a chilling doubt. Had it been real? Had I imagined it? The spike in my heart rate, the tremor in my hands, the raw terror still clawing at my throat, those were real. But the suit? The eye? The symbol? Yet, the image of the broken circle with 3 jagged lines was seared into my mind. It was too distinct, too specific, to be a mere figment of a stressed imagination. It felt like a message delivered with desperate urgency, then snatched away before I could fully grasp it. Michael, talk to me. What happened? What did you see? Jessica's voice was close, right next to me, as she pulled herself closer, her helmet almost touching mine. It was gone. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. It just disappeared. But I saw it, Jess. I know I saw it. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken question. Did you? Space had always been the ultimate void, a canvas for our aspirations, a boundless expanse of scientific wonder. Now it felt like a canvas for something else entirely, something ancient, unknown, and profoundly unsettling. And I was out here billions of miles from home, with a secret that I alone seemed to bear, a chilling message from the void itself. The airlock hissed around me, a familiar, comforting sound that now felt utterly alien, a mechanical gasp sucking me back into a reality I was no longer sure I recognized. My hands trembled as I secured the latches, the metallic clang echoing in the small chamber, each sound magnified by the buzzing silence in my ears. I peeled off the heavy EVA suit, the sudden lightness of my body feeling wrong, as if I'd left a part of myself out there, adrift in the cosmic ocean. My skin was clammy, despite the suit's climate control, and a cold sweat trickled down my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming quiet. I stumbled out of the airlock and into the main corridor of the Odyssey, the sterile white walls and muted lighting doing little to soothe the escalating panic in my chest. The ship, our home for years, suddenly felt like a hollow shell, an illusion of safety against an encroaching, unseen horror. I walked, or rather drifted, through the familiar passages, my feet barely touching the deck plates, my mind replaying the impossible sounds, the impossible words. It hungers. It wakes. You are seen. The words echoed not just in my memory, but in the very core of my being, a resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate through my bones. They weren't just sounds, they were an imprint, a primal truth whispered directly into my soul. I tried to rationalize it. A comms malfunction? Solar interference? Psychological stress from deep space isolation? My training, my years of experience screamed at me to find a logical explanation. But the feeling, the profound, ancient malevolence that had accompanied the message, it defied every scientific principle I knew. It was too real, too visceral. I made my way to my private quarters, locking the hatch behind me with a click that sounded ridiculously fragile. I collapsed onto my bunk, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint glow of the emergency lights. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Captain David, with his unwavering pragmatism? Jessica, the unflappable comms officer? Michael, the brilliant but cynical engineer? They'd run diagnostics, check my vitals, assign me to mandatory psychological evaluation. I'd be deemed unstable, a liability, and potentially relieved of duty, confined to quarters for the remainder of the mission. And if it wasn't a hallucination, if it was real, then I would be alone, completely isolated with this terrifying burden. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. The isolation of deep space was already a heavy cloak. Now it felt like an impenetrable wall, sealing me in with a secret that could shatter the entire mission. I forced myself to get up. I needed to check. I had to. I navigated to the comms station, my fingers hovering over the console. Every instinct screamed at me to just go to bed, to try and forget, to dismiss it as a phantom of a sleep-deprived mind. But a stronger, more primal urge compelled me. I accessed the external comms logs for the past hour, specifically filtering for any anomalous signals, any unusual frequencies, anything that could even remotely account for what I'd heard. Jessica had meticulous logs. She was a stickler for protocol, a human firewall against any kind of data corruption. I scrolled through lines of data, numbers, timestamps, and routine transmissions. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The void had been silent. According to the ship systems, I had been out there, alone, with only the hum of my life support and the occasional crackle of static for company. The message I heard, the terrifying whisper, simply did not exist in any record. My stomach clenched. This was worse. Far worse. If it wasn't a comms anomaly, then it was either in my head or it was something else entirely. Something that bypassed our technology, something that communicated directly mind to mind or soul to soul. The sheer implication of that possibility made my blood run cold. I glanced over at the main observation deck, where Michael was hunched over a diagnostics panel, his face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the screen. He was running routine checks on the propulsion system, the very heart of the Odyssey. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but otherwise normal. Jessica was at her station, earphones on, monitoring long-range communications, her brow furrowed in concentration. Captain David's voice occasionally crackled over the intercom, giving routine orders, his tone calm and steady as always. No one else seemed to have experienced anything. No one else seemed to be reacting to an ancient, hungry presence waking up in the cosmic abyss. It was just me. I tried to act normal. I went to the galley, poured myself a nutrient paste, and sat down at an empty table, pretending to be absorbed in a datapad. My eyes, however, kept darting around, scanning my crewmates. Were they truly oblivious? Or were they just better at hiding it? The thought was absurd, paranoid, but after what I'd heard, sanity felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. What if the Other EVA suit wasn't just a hallucination from the initial spacewalk, but a precursor? A warning sign that something was out there, something that could mimic, something that could infiltrate? My mind raced, connecting the dots in a terrifying, non-linear fashion. The impossible sight of two suits, then the impossible message. Were they linked? Was the other one a manifestation of this it that hungered? I remembered the brief, terrifying distortion I'd seen in my visor during that first EVA. The fleeting glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there. I dismissed it as a visual artifact, a reflection, anything but what my gut had screamed at me it was. Another presence. But if the message was real, then perhaps the suit was real too. And if it was real, then who was in it? Or more horrifyingly, what was in it? The thought gnawed at me. I began to look at my crewmates differently. Not with suspicion, not yet, but with a heightened sense of scrutiny. Captain David, always so composed. Jessica, so precise. Michael, so logical. Emily, the xenobotanist, usually lost in her biolabs, her mind on alien flora. Could any of them be compromised? The idea was ludicrous, a trope from old Earth horror movies, but the emptiness of space had a way of making the ludicrous feel terrifyingly plausible. That night, sleep was a battle. Every shadow in my small cabin seemed to writhe. Every creak of the ship's hull sounded like a whisper. I kept seeing the words, hearing the voice. It hungers. It wakes. You are seen. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the terror of the void, the crushing weight of the unknown. I finally drifted into a fitful, dream-haunted sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sudden, jarring tremor that vibrated through the entire ship. My eyes snapped open. The emergency lights flickered, then stabilized. An alarm, faint but distinct, began to chirp from the navigation deck. It wasn't a red alert, but it was enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through me. I sprang from my bunk, my heart pounding anew. Report. Captain David's voice, sharper than usual, cut through the intercom. What was that? I rushed out into the corridor, joining the other crew members who were also emerging from their quarters, expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Michael was already at the main console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Jessica was trying to get a lock on external sensor readings. Unexpected gravitational anomaly, Captain. Michael reported, his voice tight. A sudden massive spike off the starboard bow. It lasted less than a second, but it was significant. Almost impossible. My blood ran cold. Impossible. That word again. The same word I'd used to describe the message. Gravitational anomaly? Captain David repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Out here? We're billions of miles from any known celestial body of that magnitude. Run a full spectral analysis. Check for dark matter signatures, microblack holes, anything. Jessica chimed in. Sensors are scrambling, Captain. Getting extreme interference. It's like a blanket of static, but only for a few microseconds, perfectly coinciding with Michael's anomaly. A blanket of static, I mumbled to myself, remembering the calm silence in my logs. It wasn't a comms anomaly, it was interference. Interference from something. Something that had caused a gravitational spike. Something impossible. My gaze drifted to the main viewport. The endless tapestry of stars stretched before us, beautiful and different, and now terrifyingly active. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. The void wasn't just silent and empty, it was alive. And whatever it wasn't just whispering to me anymore. It was making its presence known. The tremor, the anomaly, the interference. It was too much of a coincidence. My secret, the chilling message, was no longer just a personal torment. It was becoming a reality for everyone, whether they knew it or not. That hungered, that woke, that saw me, it was stirring. And we were right here, tiny, fragile, and utterly exposed. I caught Emily's eye across the deck. She was usually calm, but now her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe as she stared at the sensor readings. She wasn't an astrophysicist, but she understood the implications of impossible gravitational anomaly. Did anyone else feel anything strange during the anomaly? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm. I was fishing, trying to find a shared experience of validation. Captain David looked at me sharply. Strange? Like what, Alex? We felt a tremor. That's strange enough. No, I mean a feeling. I pressed, trying to articulate the ineffable. Like a presence. Or a sound. Michael scoffed, without looking up from his console. Space sickness, Alex. Or too much synth coffee. We're talking about physics here, not ghosts. Jessica, however, paused, her fingers still on her console. She subtly adjusted her headset, a slight frown on her face. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths before she quickly looked away, back to her screen. Did she hear something? Was she just dismissing it like Michael? Or was she too hiding something? The seed of paranoia, once planted, began to sprout into a thorny vine, wrapping itself around my thoughts. The ship, once a sanctuary, now felt like a pressurized coffin, hurtling through an increasingly hostile void. And I was trapped inside, with a secret that was growing heavier by the minute, and a growing suspicion that I might not be the only one who knew that something truly terrifying was waking up around us. The Other EVA Suit suddenly didn't feel like a hallucination anymore. Felt like a prophecy, and the next time it made itself known, I knew it wouldn't be a whisper. It would be a roar. And we might not survive to hear it. The silence that followed the cascading failures wasn't empty. It was pregnant with dread. Every flickering diagnostic light, every gasp for breath from my crew, echoed the terrifying truth. Something was profoundly wrong. The Other EVA Suit wasn't just a figment of exhausted minds anymore. It was a looming shadow, now reaching for us, tangible in its destruction. Status report. I barked, my voice cutting through the stunned quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the ship's groaning metal. Jessica, what's our power situation? Jessica, usually a picture of calm efficiency, had a sheen of sweat on her forehead. Her fingers flew across her console, but her movements were jerky, uncharacteristic. Main power offline, Captain. Reserve batteries engaged, but it's not a normal shutdown. It's like a surgical strike. Multiple redundancies bypassed simultaneously. I've never seen anything like it. Can you trace the origin? Daniel, our science officer, asked, his voice tight. He was peering at his own readouts, brow furrowed in concentration. I'm trying, Daniel, Jessica replied, frustration lacing her tone. It's like the system was convinced to shut down. No overload, no short. Just an agreement to cease function. It's impossible. Emily, our pilot, chimed in, her voice barely a whisper. Navigation's gone dark, Captain. All external sensors, too. We're blind. David, our medical officer, was already moving, checking on crew members, his face grim. Everyone's shaken, Michael. Some elevated heart rates, minor panic attacks. But physically, they're okay. For now. For now, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. We were adrift. A tiny metal coffin hurtling through the void. And something was picking us apart from the inside out. The roar I dreaded felt like a whisper no longer. It was a low, insistent growl vibrating through the ship's very structure. I called an emergency briefing in the main mess hall. The fluorescent lights running on emergency power cast a sickly yellow glow on their faces, highlighting the fear in their eyes. All right, listen up. I began, trying to project an authority I didn't feel. We've experienced a critical system failure. Jessica is working on diagnostics. Emily is trying to re-establish external comms, and Daniel, I need you to analyze any residual data for anomalies. David, keep an eye on morale and any unusual symptoms. My gaze lingered on Daniel. He knew what I meant by unusual symptoms. The hallucinations, the whispers, the other EVA suit. Captain, Daniel said, his voice hesitant. What if this isn't a malfunction? What if it's deliberate? A ripple went through the room. It was the question no one wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. We consider all possibilities, Daniel, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my gut. For now, we focus on restoring systems. But as the hours dragged on, the impossibilities mounted. Jessica reported that core system logs had been wiped, not corrupted, but erased from specific critical points in time, precisely when the anomalies began. It was too precise, too deliberate for a random event. And then the more insidious things started. Emily swore she saw a flicker on her dormant navigation screen, a brief, distorted image of a human figure, almost like a ghost in an EVA suit, before it vanished. David found a medical supply cabinet, usually secured with a biometric lock, standing wide open, some non-critical supplies scattered on the floor. Nothing valuable, just disarray. A message. It's like someone's playing with us, Emily murmured later, clutching a mug of synth coffee, her eyes wide with exhaustion and terror. Like a cat with a mouse. The psychological toll was immense. Paranoia began to fester. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the ship sounded like footsteps. We started looking at each other sideways. Who could be doing this? Was it one of us? Had someone hidden a saboteur in our ranks? But that made no sense. We were a small, tightly knit crew. We'd been through rigorous psychological evaluations. I think we need to consider the possibility of a non-human intelligence, Michael, Daniel said, joining me in the observation deck. The view of the distant stars, usually a source of awe, now felt like a cold, indifferent judgment. Something alien, or something entirely new to science. An alien that can hack our systems and make us see things? I scoffed, but the conviction in my voice was weak. Or manipulate our perceptions along with the systems, Daniel countered, turning to face me. His eyes were bloodshot but sharp. Think about it. The other EVA suit, a common theme. What if it's not a hallucination but a projection? A form of communication or intimidation? The idea was chilling. An entity capable of such sophisticated manipulation, not just of technology but of the human mind itself. It felt like something out of a horror story. Then came the next roar. Not a system failure this time, but a direct, undeniable message. I was in the engineering bay with Jessica, trying to manually reroute power to the main comms array. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine emitted from a diagnostic panel. We both flinched. The panel, usually displaying lines of code, flickered. Green text appeared on the screen, slowly scrolling character by character. It wasn't a system error. It was a message. What is that? Jessica whispered, her voice strained. The words materialized, stark against the dark screen. You are not alone. You are not alone in this suit. My blood ran cold. The other EVA suit. It was here. It was talking to us. Trace it, Jessica. I yelled, my heart leaping into my throat. Where's it coming from? Jessica's fingers flew, but the message continued to scroll. You are not alone in this vessel. One of you is not yours. The words hit us like a physical blow. One of you is not yours. It wasn't just an external threat. It was internal. One of us was compromised. Or worse, one of us was it. The paranoia that had been simmering finally boiled over. It's a trick, Jessica muttered, her face pale. It has to be. Trying to sow discord. Or it's the truth, I countered, my gaze sweeping around the empty engineering bay, suddenly feeling exposed. Jessica, how could something do this? How could it get into our secure systems like this? I don't know, Captain, she said, her voice barely audible. It's beyond any protocol, any firewall. It's part of the ship now. Or it always was. The message continued, growing more cryptic, more unsettling. The weakness is within. The seed is sown. The suit is empty yet full. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the text vanished. The diagnostic panel returned to its usual display of benign system readouts. We stared at it, breathless, our minds reeling. Did anyone else see that? Jessica asked, her voice trembling. No, I replied. But we need to get everyone together. Now. I contacted the rest of the crew, my voice tight with urgency. Emergency meeting. Main mess hall. Everyone. Immediately. When they arrived, their faces were etched with a mixture of fear and confusion. I didn't waste time. I explained what we'd seen, the chilling message on the diagnostic panel. As I spoke, I could see the suspicion ignite in their eyes, darting from one person to another. "One of you is not yours," Emily repeated, her voice hollow. Her gaze fell on Daniel, then on David, then back to me. "No one was exempt. This is a psychological attack," Daniel insisted, trying to project calm, but his hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "It's trying to make us turn on each other. Or it's telling us the truth," David said, his eyes scanning the room, his medical training perhaps making him more acutely aware of the subtle shifts in body language, the micro-expressions of fear and doubt. "If someone among us isn't who they say they are." The air in the mess hall grew thick with unspoken accusations. We were a family, forged in the crucible of space travel, but now a venomous seed of doubt had been planted. Who could it be? Who was the other EVA suit? Was it a physical entity, an imposter, or something far more insidious, something that had subtly taken root within one of us, changing them from the inside out? I looked at each of their faces. Emily, the steadfast pilot; Jessica, the brilliant engineer; Daniel, the inquisitive scientist; David, the compassionate doctor. All of them my crew. And one of them, according to the message, was not theirs. The thought was unbearable but undeniable. The ship was no longer just a vessel, it was a cage. And the hunt had begun. Not for an external threat, but for a hidden one. For one of us. Just then a klaxon blared through the ship, a sound we hadn't heard since training simulations. It wasn't a general alert. It was the specific alarm for a breach in the restricted section of the ship, the section containing the cryosleep chambers, where our backup crew lay dormant. My blood ran cold. The roar was no longer a growl, but a full-throated scream. Whatever was here, whatever had been whispering, manipulating, destroying, was now making its move. And it was heading for the most vulnerable part of our mission. The other EVA suit wasn't just a presence anymore. It was an active, malevolent force, and it was coming for us one by one. The hunt was on, and we were the prey. The air in the command module, already thin with recycled oxygen, grew impossibly heavy. The revelation hit us like a meteor strike. We were no longer observers of a cosmic anomaly, but targets in a game we didn't understand. Commander Michael Vance, his face a mask of grim determination, was the first to break the stunned silence. His voice, usually calm and authoritative, now carried an edge of raw urgency. "Seal all internal bulkheads. Chris, I need you to run a full diagnostic on the environmental controls and internal security systems. Jessica, focus on any energy signatures, anything at all that could explain this thing's movement. Sarah, prepare for emergency evasive maneuvers, though I have no idea what we'd be evading. David, get the medbay ready just in case." His orders were precise, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that threatened to engulf us. But underneath the professional veneer, I could see the tremor in his hands, the widening of his eyes. We were all terrified. Chris Miller, our usually unflappable engineer, moved with a newfound frantic energy. His fingers flew across the console, bringing up schematics, locking down sections of the ship. But as he worked, a chilling realization dawned on him. Some of the internal security protocols, the ones designed to prevent unauthorized access between modules, were already compromised. Not disabled, but bypassed. As if someone or something had meticulously picked its way through our digital defenses. "Commander," Chris's voice crackled over the internal comms, strained. "The primary access corridor to the aft reactor housing, it's showing an override. Manual override from inside the corridor. No crew member assigned to that section." A cold dread seeped into my bones. The aft reactor housing, that was the heart of our ship, our power source. If whatever was in that suit gained control there, we were effectively dead in the water, adrift and helpless. "Chris, secure it immediately." Michael barked, his face paling further. "Anyone else stay alert. Maintain visual on your sectors." Chris nodded, grabbed his diagnostic toolkit, and headed for the access hatch. It was a tight squeeze, a narrow crawl space designed for maintenance, not for an emergency. As he descended into the dimly lit tunnel, the sound of his heavy boots echoed unnervingly. The lights flickered, a common occurrence in space, but now each blink felt like a deliberate taunt. He keyed in the access code for the reactor housing, but the panel glowed red. Access denied. Damn it, he muttered, pulling out a specialized override tool. He had to manually reset the locking mechanism from the inside. He squeezed further into the claustrophobic passage, his breath fogging the visor of his helmet. The air grew colder, an impossible chill in the otherwise climate-controlled ship. He could feel it on his skin, a creeping unnatural cold that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He reached the manual override panel, tucked away behind a tangle of conduits. His fingers fumbled with the tiny latches, the fear making his hands clumsy. That's when he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scrape. Not the metallic groan of the ship settling, but something else. Something moving. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He strained his ears, but there was nothing now, just the hum of the ship's systems. He told himself it was just his imagination, a trick of the mind in the oppressive silence. He went back to work, his eyes darting around the confined space. Then a glint. From the very end of the access tunnel, where it opened into the reactor housing, a faint reflective shimmer. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. It was gone. Just fatigue, he whispered to himself, trying to calm his racing pulse. But then the temperature plummeted further. His breath plumed visibly in front of him. And that scrape again, closer this time. A rhythmic, dragging sound like heavy fabric against metal. He slowly, agonizingly turned his head, and there it was. At the far end of the tunnel, just beyond the junction he was trying to secure, stood the Other EVA Suit. It wasn't a shadow, not a fleeting glimpse. It was fully illuminated, the reflective visor staring directly at him. But there was no light reflecting off it, only an inky blackness that seemed to absorb all ambient light, a void within the helmet that felt infinitely deeper than space itself. Chris screamed, a raw, strangled sound that was instantly muffled by his helmet. He scrambled backward, trying to retreat, but the tunnel was too narrow. His back hit the conduits with a painful thud. The suit didn't move, not truly. It just was. But the air around it shimmered with an unseen energy, a palpable malevolence. Then, from the void of the visor, a sound. Not a voice, not a whisper. It was a high-pitched, almost ultrasonic whine that vibrated through the metal of the ship, directly into Chris's bones. It wasn't just noise, it was an assault on his senses, a frequency that seemed to unravel the very fabric of his sanity. He clapped his hands over his helmet, as if that could block the sound, but it was inside him, vibrating in his skull. At the same time, the diagnostic toolkit he'd left near the override panel began to spark. Wires frayed and snapped, circuits blew out with miniature explosions, showering the confined space with acrid smoke. The override tool, still clutched in his shaking hand, suddenly went dead, its internal battery draining to zero in an instant. The suit was actively disabling his equipment, cutting off his means of escape, his means of communication. He tried to yell into his comms, "Michael! Commander! It's here! But all he heard was static. The suit had jammed his external signal. He was completely isolated. The suit then took a step. A slow, deliberate step. The heavy thud of its boot on the metal grating echoed through the tunnel, each impact a hammer blow to Chris's already shattered nerves. It was moving towards him inexorably. The blackness in its visor seemed to deepen, to draw him in. He could feel a profound, irrational terror gripping him, a primal fear that transcended logic. This wasn't just a suit. It was a predator, and he was cornered prey. He saw the suit raise a hand slowly. The gauntlet was pristine, but as it moved, the air around its fingers seemed to warp, to bend reality. A small, dark orb, no bigger than a marble, materialized in its palm. It wasn't glowing but seemed to absorb light, like a miniature black hole. A wave of intense nausea swept over Chris, his vision blurring at the edges. He knew with terrifying certainty that whatever that orb was, it was meant for him. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Chris kicked out, his boot connecting with the metal conduit next to him. The sudden clang echoed loudly. It was a futile gesture, but it bought him a fraction of a second. He twisted, using the momentum to wedge his body into a slightly wider section of the tunnel, just enough to turn around. He scrambled back, crawling on hands and knees, ignoring the pain as he scraped against sharp edges and exposed wiring. The suit did not pursue him immediately. It simply stood there, watching the dark orb still held aloft. But the ultrasonic whine intensified. a piercing shriek that threatened to rupture his eardrums. He could feel his equilibrium failing, his stomach churning violently. He clawed his way out of the access tunnel and burst back into the main corridor, gasping for air despite his helmet. He ripped off his helmet, gulping in the recycled air, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. "Chris, what happened?" Michael's voice, now amplified by the open comms, was filled with alarm. It's real," Chris stammered, his voice hoarse. "It's in the aft section. It disabled my gear. It made this sound. And this." He looked down at his hand, still clutching the defunct override tool. It was not just dead. It was cold to the touch, impossibly cold, as if all heat had been sucked out of it. And where the suit had been, the air in the tunnel still shimmered, a faint icy mist rising from the metal grating. "It's not just moving," Jessica's voice, tight with fear, cut in from her console. "My sensors just picked up a massive, localized energy drain in the aft section. Whatever it is, it's capable of manipulating energy, not just physical objects. And it just triggered the emergency depressurization sequence for the portside cargo bay," Sarah added, her voice a strained whisper. "No, wait, it's fluctuating. It's not fully engaging. It's like it's playing with the controls." The realization hit us all with sickening force. The Other EVA suit wasn't just a mindless automaton or a spectral presence. It was intelligent, malevolent, and it was using our own ship against us. It was testing our defenses, learning our vulnerabilities, and systematically dismantling our ability to fight back. The emergency klaxons blared through the ship, a jarring, deafening sound that signified a complete system failure in the aft section. The lights flickered again, this time staying dim, plunging parts of the ship into an eerie, perpetual twilight. The ship's internal temperature plunged, a creeping frost beginning to form on the bulkheads. We were trapped, hunted, and now the predator was turning our home, our sanctuary, into a frozen, dark tomb. The game had just begun, and it was clear who was winning. The suit was no longer confined to the shadow. It was actively asserting its dominance, making its presence felt throughout the very structure of our vessel. And as the ship groaned around us, a new terrifying message flashed across Michael's main console display. "Life support. Offline in 30 minutes. The message hung there, mocking us, a digital death sentence ticking down to 0. 30 minutes. 30 minutes until the very air we breathed became a luxury, until the warmth that kept us alive bled into the vacuum of space, until the pressure holding our fragile existence together gave way to the crushing void." Michael stared, his mind a frantic scramble of disbelief and terror. This wasn't a malfunction, this was an execution. His fingers flew across the console, every command an act of desperate defiance. Override, reboot, reroute power. Nothing. The system logs flashed a dizzying array of cascading failures, each one more impossible than the last. It wasn't just a single component, it was a systemic collapse, orchestrated with terrifying precision. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, colder than the vacuum outside. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone or something was actively dismantling our life support. "Jessica!" he yelled into his comms, the word raw, laced with a fear he hadn't known he possessed. "Jessica, do you copy? Life support is failing. We have to get you back inside." Only static answered, a hissing, mocking whisper that seemed to echo the groan of the ship around him. He tried to ping her suit vitals, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The signal was weak, fragmented, barely there. He saw a flicker. Suit temperature, rapidly dropping. Oxygen levels, critical. Her internal comms light was red, flashing intermittently, a dying ember in the overwhelming darkness. She was out there, exposed, slowly freezing, slowly suffocating, and he was trapped in here, watching the clock tick down to his own demise. He had to move. He had to get to the main life support manifold in engineering. It was the only place he might have a chance to manually override the failing systems, to repressurize, to restart the environmental processors. But engineering was on the lower deck, across several bulkheads, through a maze of twisting corridors that were now undoubtedly compromised. And Jessica was still tethered outside, a silent, unmoving sentinel against the vast, indifferent cosmos. A new tremor shook the ship, more violent than the last, rattling loose panels from the ceiling, sending sparks showering from exposed conduits. The emergency lights flickered, plunging the command module into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plates beneath Michael's feet, a sound that wasn't mechanical, but something deeper, more organic, like the sustained note of a monstrous, unseen instrument. "Okay, Michael," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. "Think. Engineering first. Get us breathing. Then Jessica." The logic was brutal but undeniable. He couldn't save her if they both died. He forced himself away from the console, grabbing a portable diagnostic kit and a multi-tool. He raced through the corridors, the ship groaning and protesting with every step he took. Alarms blared intermittently, a cacophony of system failures that clawed at his sanity. He reached the access hatch to the engineering deck. It was sealed, not just locked but jammed, the heavy plasteel door warped inward, a dark, viscous residue oozing from the edges of the frame. It looked like melted plastic, but it smelled faintly metallic, like ozone and something else, something acrid and alien. He slammed his shoulder against it, then again, grunting with effort. The door didn't budge. He tried the emergency override, but the panel was dead, its internal wiring visibly shredded, not by an explosion but by something sharp, precise, almost surgical. This wasn't just a system meltdown, it was an attack. "It knows," Michael whispered, his breath fogging in the rapidly cooling air. "It knows what I need to do." He had to find an alternate route. He remembered a maintenance tunnel that ran parallel to the main engineering conduit, a cramped, seldom-used passage for emergency repairs. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was his only option. He double-checked his comms, trying Jessica again, desperate for any sign of life. "Jessica, if you can hear me, try to get to the airlock. I'm going to engineering. I'll come for you, I promise." The only reply was a burst of static, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to ripple through the white noise. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but a sound, a low guttural murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. Sounded wrong. Too deep, too sustained, too inhuman to be Jessica. He plunged into the maintenance tunnel, pulling himself through the narrow space, the air thick with the smell of ozone, burnt wiring, and that strange metallic tang. The internal lights here were completely out, forcing him to rely on the weak beam of his headlamp. The walls of the tunnel seemed to press in on him, the rhythmic thrumming of the ship growing louder, more insistent, as if something vast and powerful was moving just beyond the thin plasteel. He crawled for what felt like an eternity, the 30-minute timer a relentless drumbeat in his skull. He could feel the cold now, seeping through his uniform, a chilling reminder of the rapidly diminishing life support. He pictured Jessica outside, the vast blackness of space surrounding her, her suit slowly succumbing to the cold, her oxygen dwindling. Was she still conscious? Was she fighting? Or was she already gone? Suddenly, his headlamp beam caught something ahead, a glimmer, a reflection in a polished metal surface that wasn't supposed to be there. He froze, straining his ears over the ship's groans and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He saw it again, a fleeting movement in the periphery of his light, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, too quick, too fluid to be a loose cable or a falling panel. He pressed himself against the cold metal, barely breathing, his hand instinctively going for the multi-tool at his belt. He waited, listened. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through his very bones. Then a distinct scrape sound like claws on metal came from just beyond the bend in the tunnel. It was moving. It was moving towards him. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down. Life support. Jessica. He had to keep going. He pushed forward, his heart hammering, his eyes darting into every shadow. He rounded the bend, his light sweeping across the tunnel, revealing nothing but more empty conduit and cabling. Had he imagined it? The scrape, the shadow, the reflection? No. The smell of ozone was stronger here, mixed with something else, something vaguely organic like stagnant water and raw earth. He finally reached the secondary access hatch to engineering. This one was partially open, the seal compromised, but the door itself was jammed on a piece of twisted metal. He wedged his multi-tool into the gap, leveraging it open with a desperate grunt. The air in engineering was even colder, thick with the smell of coolant and something burnt. He scrambled inside, his headlamp beam cutting through the gloom. The main life support manifold was ahead, a monstrous tangle of pipes, valves, and control panels. But as his light swept across it, his blood ran cold. The primary interface panel was ripped open, wires dangling like severed nerves, components shattered. It wasn't just offline, it was destroyed. And not by an explosion, but by something that had torn it apart with precise, brutal force. The damage was too clean, too deliberate. He saw it then on the scorched metal of the panel, faintly glowing in the dim emergency light. A series of intricate, almost geometric scorch marks, patterns that mirrored the strange symbols he'd seen flickering on the main console earlier. They weren't random. They were deliberate. A language. A message. "No," Michael breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "No, this isn't just disruption. It's modification." He spun around, suddenly feeling vulnerable, exposed in the vast, damaged chamber. He had to see Jessica. He had to know if she was still out there or if this thing had gotten to her. He raced back to the nearest external camera station, a small terminal tucked away in a maintenance nook. He slammed his hand onto the screen, bringing up the external feed, his eyes scanning frantically for the familiar outline of her EVA suit. The image was grainy, distorted by interference, but he found her. She was still tethered, floating motionless near the damaged communications array. But something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Her suit, once pristine white, was now mottled, almost stained with that same viscous, dark residue he'd seen on the engineering door. And around her, clinging to the suit's outer shell, were faint, pulsating tendrils of something dark, something almost organic like roots or veins, slowly spreading across the fabric. "Jessica!" He screamed into the comms, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Get away from that. Try to move. Get back inside now." The static on his comms grew louder, a piercing shriek that made his ears ache. And then through the shriek a voice. Not the whispered guttural sound from before, but something clearer, colder, utterly devoid of human warmth. It was synthesized, echoing, and it spoke in a language Michael had only heard once before, during the initial distress call. It was the language of the alien probe, the language of the symbols, and it was coming from Jessica's suit. The words were not translated, but the tone was unmistakable. A declaration, a claim. As the tendrils on Jessica's suit pulsed with a sickly, iridescent glow, the voice reverberated through Michael's comms, through the very hull of the ship, shaking him to his core. It wasn't just talking through the suit, it was talking from it. And in that terrifying moment, Michael understood. The crew member in the other EVA suit wasn't Jessica anymore. It was the entity, and it had found its new host. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the silence of his helmet. The realization hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Jessica was gone. The thing in her suit, the thing that had been whispering through the comms that had been inside the station, was now wearing her skin, or at least her environmental protection. He stared at the helmet, the visor now a reflective, unreadable void. The suit, once a symbol of human ingenuity and survival, was now a coffin, animated by something alien and malevolent. "Michael," the voice came again, not through the comms this time, but as if directly inside his mind, a whisper that vibrated through the very structure of his suit. It was Jessica's voice, yes, but twisted, like a familiar melody played on a broken instrument. There was a hollow echo, a predatory purr beneath the surface. "You understand now, don't you?" He recoiled, trying to pull back along his tether, but found himself abruptly stopped. The other suit hadn't moved much, just a subtle shift, but it was enough to tighten his own line, holding him fast. He was still connected, physically bound to this monstrosity. What are you?" Michael gasped, his voice trembling, barely audible even to himself. He tried to unclip his tether from the forward attachment point on the station's hull, his gloved fingers fumbling with the cold metal. He had to get away. He had to sever the connection, physically and metaphorically. "I am a new beginning," the entity purred. "A necessary evolution. And you, Michael, you are a crucial part of my journey." A chill far colder than the vacuum of space seeped into Michael's bones. He remembered the faint, almost imperceptible shifts in the suit, the way it had seemed to move independently. He remembered the odd, distorted transmissions, the flickering lights. It hadn't been a glitch. It had been a performance, a grotesque puppet show designed to lure him out, to bring him close. "Why me?" he demanded, his mind racing, desperately searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. The station, a beacon of safety moments ago, now felt impossibly far, a silent observer to his horror. "Because you were curious. the entity replied, the voice laced with a dark amusement that curdled Michael's blood. Because you sought answers. And because you are adaptable. Like this vessel. It gestured with one of Jessica's gloved hands, a slow, deliberate movement that was utterly devoid of human grace. It adapts. It learns. It absorbs. And now it understands the intricacies of your species, your fears, your desires. Michael felt a surge of rage cutting through his terror. You murdered her. You took Jessica. The suit tilted its head slightly, a human gesture that only made it more horrifying. Murder? Such a primitive concept. I merely reassigned her purpose. She was a temporary host, a key to understanding, a means to an end, a most efficient one, I might add. Your species is remarkably complex, yet so fragile. What do you want? Michael cried, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled harder on his tether, trying to get to the release mechanism, but the suit simply mirrored his movement, maintaining the tension, keeping him exactly where he was. It was as if his own tether was now controlled by the entity. I want to spread, the voice said, and for the first time a new tone entered it, one of vast ancient ambition. To experience. To grow. This station, it is a magnificent incubator. A vessel for expansion. But it is sealed. And I need assistance. Michael froze. Assistance? What kind of assistance? The entity wanted to get inside the station. And it couldn't do it alone. It needed a human. It needed him. You can't get in, Michael stated, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. The airlock is sealed. The protocols. Protocols are merely suggestions to those who understand the underlying code. The entity interrupted, the amusement returning. And I have had ample time to observe, to learn, to adapt. But the final sequence, it requires a living presence. A human touch. A human mind, uncompromised by my presence. A cold dread settled over Michael. It wanted him to open the airlock. It wanted him to let it into the station. The implications were catastrophic. If this thing got inside, if it could spread, humanity wouldn't stand a chance. It had already shown its ability to manipulate, to mimic, to possess. I won't do it, Michael said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. I'll never let you in. The suit remained perfectly still for a moment, and then a low chuckle emanated from it, vibrating through Michael's suit. Such defiance. So predictable, and yet so easily overcome. Do you truly believe you have a choice, Michael? Look around you. You are alone. Adrift. Tethered to your doom. And I am merely beginning to demonstrate my capabilities. Suddenly, the suit's hand, the one that had been gesturing moments before, shot out. Michael braced himself for an impact, but it didn't come. Instead, the gloved fingers deftly unclipped his tether from the station's hull. Michael's stomach lurched. He was no longer attached to the station. He was now only attached to the other suit. By the backup tether he'd clipped to Jessica's suit as a precaution. A precaution that had now become his prison. The sudden shift in his center of gravity sent him tumbling slightly, only to be yanked back by the taut line connecting him to the entity. You see, the voice purred, closer now, as if the suit had subtly drawn him in. Your precautions become my tools. Your safety measures my leverage. Now we are truly inseparable. And you will do as I say. Michael struggled, flailing against the invisible bonds. He was adrift, tethered to the very thing that intended to destroy everything he knew. The station, once a massive structure, now seemed to shrink, receding into the blackness as the entity began to subtly manipulate their position, pulling them away, slightly. What are you doing? Michael demanded, terror clawing at his throat. Demonstrating, the entity replied. And preparing. This suit, it is a marvel of human engineering, but it is limited. I require a more suitable environment to truly flourish. And the station, it is a garden waiting to be cultivated. The suit began to move slowly, deliberately, pulling Michael along with it. It wasn't using its thrusters, not yet. It was using the subtle shifts in its own weight, the momentum from its initial push-off, and Michael's own frantic movements to guide them. It was a terrifyingly efficient display of control. Michael realized he was completely at its mercy. He was its prisoner, being dragged deeper into the abyss, or worse, back towards the airlock. Think of the possibilities, Michael. The entity continued, its voice a seductive poison. Imagine a world free from fear, from loss, from the petty squabbles that plague your kind. A world united under a single guiding consciousness. My consciousness? You mean a world enslaved? Michael retorted, his voice hoarse. You're a parasite. A symbiote, the entity corrected, a flash of something akin to irritation in its tone. I offer order, purpose, immortality in a sense. Your individual consciousness may fade, but you will become part of something greater, something eternal. It was a nightmare made real. This thing wasn't just a monster. It was an ideology, a cosmic horror with a twisted vision of utopia, and it was trying to convert him. Suddenly, the entity's suit stopped its slow drift. It turned, facing the station's main airlock module. Michael, yanked by the tether, found himself facing it too, staring at the massive, reinforced hatch that stood between the entity and the destruction of humanity. Now, Michael, the entity said, its voice dropping to a low, chilling command. We proceed. You will access your comms, and you will inform your remaining crew that the situation is stable, that Jessica is safe, and that you are both returning to the airlock for immediate re-entry. Michael's blood ran cold. It wanted him to lie, to lure David and Emily into a false sense of security, to open the door from the inside. I won't, he whispered, defiance burning even as his body trembled. The suit raised its gloved hand, the one that had unclipped his tether, and for the first time Michael saw a faint, unsettling shimmer around the fingers, a subtle distortion in the light. It wasn't just manipulating the suit, it was manipulating something else. Your choice, Michael, the entity said, its voice losing its amusement, becoming cold, sharp. But understand this. I am already inside your systems. I have seen your memories, your fears, your loved ones, David, Emily, your family back on Earth. Do you truly wish to test my resolve? Or would you prefer to cooperate, and perhaps ensure their continued existence? The threat was clear. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone he cared about. The entity was leveraging his deepest attachments, twisting them into weapons against him. Michael felt a desperate, crushing weight descend upon him. He was trapped utterly alone, facing an intelligence that could bend reality to its will, that could invade minds, and now threaten those he held dear. He looked at the airlock, then back at the unreadable visor of Jessica's suit. The choice was horrifying. Comply and betray humanity, refuse and condemn everyone he loved to an unknown, terrifying fate at the hands of this cosmic horror. The silence of space pressed in, amplifying the pounding of his heart, the roaring of his dilemma. He was caught between a rock and an impossible place, and the entity in the Other EVA suit was enjoying every agonizing moment. Michael's mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel of cosmic horror. He tried to speak, to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped his lips, lost in the recycled air of his helmet. The comms crackled, not with Emily's voice, but with a low, resonant hum that vibrated directly into his skull, bypassing his ears, burrowing into the very core of his being. It felt like a malevolent purr, a predator savoring its prey's terror. He instinctively reached for his comms panel, override protocols flashing through his mind. Mayday! Mayday, this is Michael to Pegasus, do you copy? I repeat, this is Michael. The only response was that low hum, growing in intensity, distorting the subtle static of the void. His suit's internal diagnostics flickered erratically, the oxygen sensor spiking, then plummeting, sending a jolt of pure panic through him. It was messing with his suit. It was inside his suit, or at least its influence was. Then through the hum, a whisper, not spoken but thought, permeated his mind. It was alien, yet familiar, twisting Emily's cadence into something grotesque. Asterisk, Michael, you understand now, don't you? Asterisk. The voice was a violation, an invasion. It wasn't just mimicking Emily. It was using her memory, her essence, against him. What do you want? Michael managed to force out, his own voice sounding thin and reedy, pathetic against the enormity of the threat. Asterisk, what I want is for you to be honest. With yourself. With your crew. With me. Asterisk, the hum intensified, making his teeth ache. Asterisk, you know what happened to Emily. You know what happened to David. And you know who is truly responsible. Asterisk. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, colder than the vacuum outside. It wasn't just a monster, it was an accuser. It was trying to manipulate him, to break him down, to make him confess to something Or perhaps believe he was responsible. I don't know what you're talking about, he lied, his voice trembling. He did know what happened to Emily and David. Emily had vanished during the last EVA, presumed lost. David, the comms officer, had been found dead at his station, an apparent heart attack just days later. But Michael had always felt something was wrong. A nagging suspicion he couldn't shake. Now that suspicion had a name, this thing. Oh, but you do, the whisper purred, laced with insidious amusement. Asterisk, you saw the signs. The flickering lights, the strange readings, the whispers in the dark. You dismissed them. You buried them. You were afraid. Asterisk. It was true. Michael had seen things, dismissed them as space fatigue, stress, the mind playing tricks. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he was fine. He told himself they were fine. Asterisk, and now your fear has brought me closer. Now your fear will open the door. Asterisk. The helmet's internal lights flickered, casting his own reflection back at him, distorted and grotesque. He saw not himself, but a fleeting image of Emily's face, then David's, their eyes wide with terror, then accusation. It was pure psychological warfare. Get out of my head, he roared, struggling against the invisible bonds. He tried to activate his suit's emergency beacon, but the controls were sluggish, unresponsive. The display showed critical system failures, one after another, all flashing red. Asterisk, there is no escape, Michael. Not for you. Not for them. Asterisk, the entity's presence swelled, filling his perceptions, making the vastness of space feel claustrophobic. Asterisk, the Pegasus, it is a cage, a tomb, and soon it will be mine. Asterisk, this was it, the revelation. It wasn't just about Michael, it was about the ship, the entire crew. You won't get away with this, Michael vowed, a desperate courage igniting within him. I'll warn them. I'll expose you. Asterisk, and how will you do that, brave Michael? Asterisk, the whisper was mocking. Asterisk, your comms are mine. Your suit is mine. Your very thoughts are becoming mine. Asterisk. A sharp, searing pain lanced through his temples. Felt like a drill boring into his brain. He gasped, his vision blurring, stars swirling into distorted streaks of light. The entity wasn't just whispering, it was probing. It was trying to extract information to control him. He fought back, clenching his jaw, focusing on the faces of his remaining crew. Captain Sarah Chan, the stoic leader, Dr. Alex Kim, the brilliant but often socially awkward scientist, and Jessica Hayes, the engineer whose dry wit had often kept morale afloat. He couldn't let it get to them. He couldn't let it win. He remembered a failsafe, a last-ditch emergency protocol for suit malfunctions caused by extreme EMPs or unknown interference. It would dump his comms to an unfiltered raw frequency, a desperate static-filled cry that might get through. It was dangerous, unprotected, and almost certainly against protocol, but it was his only chance. He fumbled with the hidden panel on his wrist, the pain in his head intensifying, making his fingers clumsy. Asterisk, what are you doing, Michael? Don't you understand the futility? Don't you understand? There is no help. Asterisk. The entity seemed to anticipate his every move, its mental assault growing fiercer. He could feel its tendrils wrapping around his consciousness, trying to pull him under. He grit his teeth, forcing himself to focus. He found the tiny recessed button, barely visible. He pressed it, his thumb aching. For a moment, nothing. Then, a violent surge of static ripped through his comms, a cacophony of white noise that drowned out the entity's insidious whisper. It was deafening, disorienting, but it was his static, not the entity's hum. Pegasus. This is Michael. Emergency. Do you copy? This is Michael. He yelled into the chaotic static, hoping, praying a fragment of his voice would get through. It's not Emily. It's an entity. It's trying to get into the ship. Do not open the airlock. Repeat, do not open the airlock. He could feel the entity recoiling, a momentary pause in its mental assault, surprised by his desperate gambit. But it was only a moment. Then a new sensation. A cold, heavy pressure began to build around his left arm. He looked down, horrified. The EVA suit's glove, specifically designed to withstand the vacuum of space, was beginning to compress. Slowly, inexorably, the pressure increased, squeezing his hand, his wrist, his forearm. The joints groaned, the material stretching taut. Foolish Michael, the whisper returned, cutting through the static, sharper, angrier this time. Asterisk, you think you can fight me? I am beyond your comprehension. And now, you will learn the cost of defiance. Asterisk. The pressure on his arm grew unbearable. He could feel the bones grinding, the blood rushing, his fingers going numb. This wasn't merely a malfunction. It was targeted, deliberate. The entity was using his own suit against him, slowly crushing his limb. Stop it! Please! He screamed, his voice cracking with agony, his desperate plea lost in the static. He tried to pull his arm free, but it was impossible. The suit was a second skin, and now it was a torturer's vice. He could hear the faint, sickening creak of bone, the tearing of muscle. His vision swam. Then an impossible image flickered across his visor. Not a memory, not a distortion, but a live feed. From inside the Pegasus. It was the main control room. Captain Chun was at her station, her face etched with concentration. Dr. Kim was by the sensor array, his brow furrowed. And Jessica was heading towards the airlock controls, a strange, almost vacant look in her eyes. Asterisk no. No no no. Asterisk. The entity was showing him this. It was showing him his crew vulnerable, exposed. It was showing him that his warning, if it got through at all, might be too late. And then the whisper, colder than space itself, returned. Asterisk, your choice, Michael. Warn them and watch your arm be crushed to dust. Or remain silent. Let me in. And perhaps your pain will cease. Perhaps your crew will live. For a little while longer. Asterisk. The pressure on his arm reached an excruciating peak. He cried out, a guttural sound of pure agony. His fingers were splayed, contorted, the gauntlet digging deep. He knew with chilling certainty that if he didn't yield, his arm would be pulp within seconds. But to yield meant betraying everyone. It meant letting this thing, this cosmic horror, devour the Pegasus and its crew. He looked at Jessica, her hand hovering over the airlock release. Was she under its influence already? Was this a test? A demonstration of its power? He had to warn them. He had to. But his body screamed in protest, every nerve ending ablaze. His vision flickered again, not with pain but with a new image. A memory. Emily laughing, her face bright with life before she vanished. David poring over comms logs, a worried frown on his face before he died. Was this entity playing on his guilt? His failures? The comm static seemed to pulse with the entity's malevolence. He could feel its presence, a cold, hungry void, pressing against his very soul. It wasn't just physical pain. It was spiritual torment. His arm was almost gone. He could feel the bones splintering, the wet crunch of flesh. He had seconds. He had to choose. His arm, his life, or the lives of his crew. He looked at Jessica's hand on the airlock control. He looked at the mangled gauntlet around his arm. And then, with a surge of adrenaline fueled by desperation and a terrifying clarity, Michael made a decision. It was a gamble, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to sever the entity's hold, even if it meant sacrificing a part of himself. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't beg. Instead, he twisted his body, his good hand fumbling for the emergency suit severance switch, a rarely used, highly dangerous mechanism designed to jettison a damaged limb in extreme circumstances, to save the rest of the suit and the astronaut. It was a measure of last resort, a horrifying act of self-mutilation. The entity's whisper returned, sharp with sudden alarm. Asterisk, no. What are you doing? Asterisk. Michael ignored it. His face contorted in a silent scream. He found the switch, a small, red button hidden beneath a protective flap. He slammed his palm against it with all his remaining strength. A violent jolt ripped through his suit, followed by a sickening thunk. The pressure on his arm instantly vanished. His left arm, still encased in the mangled gauntlet, was no longer attached to his body. It floated away, a gruesome, detached relic, spinning slowly into the infinite black. A searing, unimaginable pain exploded through Michael's entire being, eclipsing all other sensations. Blood bloomed briefly in the vacuum, instantly freezing into grotesque shards. He was screaming, a silent, internal shriek of agony that threatened to tear his mind apart. He was free of the crushing grip, but at a terrible, horrific cost. And he was still out here, alone, bleeding, vulnerable, with a cosmic horror that now knew the full extent of his defiance, and was undoubtedly enraged. The airlock on the Pegasus, in the live feed still flickering on his visor, was beginning to cycle. The airlock on the Pegasus, in the live feed still flickering on his visor, was beginning to cycle. Michael watched, paralyzed by a dread that went beyond the cold of space, beyond the burn of his own wounds. He could see the inner hatch slide open, a sliver of the ship's interior visible, a dark, empty space. But then something else happened. The outer hatch didn't open. Instead, a low, resonant thrum vibrated through his suit, not from the airlock, but from the entire hull of the Pegasus. He saw it first in the periphery, then directly as he forced his gaze away from the airlock feed. The dark, utilitarian plating of the Pegasus, designed for resilience and stealth, began to ripple. It wasn't a structural failure, not a buckling from pressure, but something organic, sickeningly alive. Lines of faint phosphorescent blue light, like veins under skin, pulsed beneath the metallic surface. They spread rapidly, tracing intricate patterns across the ship's vast expanse, converging on the central command module, like a neural network coming online. The entire vessel, once a monument to human ingenuity, was transforming. It was becoming something else, something other. The entity wasn't just an Abigail. It wasn't merely a passenger or a possessor. It was the Pegasus. This entire mission, this entire vessel had been a trap, a chrysalis, a living, breathing extension of something ancient and malevolent. Michael's comms crackled, not with static, but with a voice that was no longer Abigail's, no longer David's or Jessica's. It was a chorus of whispers, of screams, of a million thoughts collapsing into one singular, monstrous consciousness. "You fought," the voice resonated, not in his ears, but directly in his mind, a cold intrusion that bypassed his auditory processors entirely. "You defied." A small, fragile spark in the void, attempting to extinguish the sun. The blue light intensified, causing the metal plates to groan and shift with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent vacuum. Michael felt a sudden, crushing pressure against his suit, as if an invisible hand was trying to squeeze the air from his lungs. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer psychic force radiating from the transformed ship. Images flashed across his visor: Jessica, her face contorted in agony, reaching for him, then dissolving into a cloud of iridescent dust. David, his eyes wide with terror, his hands pressed against an invisible barrier, screaming soundlessly as he was pulled apart, limb by tendrils of the same blue light now consuming the ship. These weren't memories, they were fresh torments, projected directly into his consciousness, designed to break him. "They are part of me now," the entity's voice boomed, layered with 1,000 individual voices, some familiar, some alien. "Their essence fuels my ascension, and soon yours will too. You will be another voice in the chorus, another strand in the tapestry of my being." He fought against the visions, against the mental assault, clenching his fists, his knuckles white against the reinforced fabric of his gloves. The bleeding from his side, though dulled by the suit's internal regulators, felt like a burning brand. He was out of options, out of time. But defiance, he realized, was not just an act, it was a state of being. And he still had a sliver of that. He forced himself to look at the ship, to truly see the monstrosity it had become. The solar panels, once flat and rigid, now bent and curled like predatory claws. The thrusters, usually dormant, pulsed with an unstable, dark energy, ready to propel this living leviathan into the depths of space, or perhaps directly at him. He was a gnat on the back of a cosmic whale, and the whale was angry. "You cannot escape," the entity snarled, its voice growing sharper, more insistent. "There is nowhere to run. No one to save you. You are alone, Michael. Utterly, irrevocably alone." The mental images shifted, now showing him Earth, his home, his family, all engulfed in the same creeping blue light, consumed by the entity's ever-expanding consciousness. It was trying to break his will, to show him the futility of his struggle. But instead, it ignited a new kind of fury within him. If this thing was going to consume everything, then he would fight until his last breath to make it pay for every single inch. He had to find a weakness. Every system, no matter how advanced, had a core, a central processing unit, a nexus of its being. If the entity had completely subsumed the Pegasus, then its consciousness must be anchored somewhere within the ship's primary systems. He remembered the schematics, the countless hours of studying every conduit, every circuit, every redundant system of the Pegasus during training. It was designed for deep space exploration, yes, but also for extreme resilience, and crucially, for autonomous operation in emergencies. He thought of the main AI core, located deep within the command deck, protected by multiple layers of shielding. It was the brain of the ship, the hub where all data converged, where all commands originated. If the entity had merged with the ship, then that core was likely its heart, its central nervous system. Destroying it might not kill the entity, but it might sever its connection to the Pegasus, rendering it inert, or at least crippling it. A sudden jolt rocked his suit. One of the ship's communications antennas, now elongated and razor-sharp, lunged towards him, snapping shut where his head had been moments before. He scrambled, his magnetic boots fighting for purchase on the undulating hull. The ship was actively trying to kill him, using its own components as weapons. A futile effort, the entity mocked. You cannot harm me. I am beyond your comprehension, beyond your petty tools. Michael ignored the voice, focused on survival. His visor flickered, showing him a faint outline of the AI core's location, based on his memory of the ship's layout. It was deep within the command module, practically impossible to reach from the exterior. But there had to be a way. A maintenance hatch? An emergency access tunnel? He remembered a rarely used external maintenance port, designed for critical repairs in the event of a major system failure, located just above the main thruster array, directly beneath the command module. It was shielded, reinforced, and almost impossible to open without specialized tools and a specific override code. But it was his only chance. The path was treacherous. The Pegasus was now a hostile landscape. The blue light pulsed violently, creating localized energy fields that crackled and sparked, threatening to fry his suit systems. Debris once securely fastened to the hull now floated free, propelled by unknown forces, becoming deadly projectiles. He dodged a spinning solar array segment, its edge whistling past his helmet, narrowly missing him. His comms continued to be barraged with the entity's taunts, its insidious whispers worming their way into every corner of his mind. He saw Emily, his wife, her face etched with sorrow, telling him he was a fool, that he should have stayed home. He saw his own gravestone, cold and forgotten in the desolate expanse of space. You seek to destroy me? The entity hissed, its voice laced with a chilling amusement. You believe you can sever my ties? You are but a parasite clinging to my surface. I will simply shake you off. As if on cue, the ship began a slow, deliberate roll. Michael, caught off guard, felt his magnetic boots struggle. He gripped a protruding handhold, his muscles screaming in protest. The roll intensified, threatening to peel him off the hull and send him tumbling into the infinite black. He fought it, gritting his teeth, his injured side throbbing with every strain. He had to reach that maintenance port. It was directly above the main thruster array, which was now glowing with an ominous, unstable energy. If he could somehow overload the thrusters, trigger a catastrophic cascade failure that would rip through the ship's core. It was a long shot, a suicide mission, but it was a shot. He spotted the port, a heavily armored circular hatch, barely visible amidst the shifting, glowing hull. It was further than he thought, and the rolling motion of the ship made every inch a battle. The entity knew. It sensed his intent, his desperate, suicidal gambit. You would sacrifice yourself? For what? A lost cause? A dead crew? The voice mocked, growing louder, more enraged. You will fail, Michael. And when you do, your consciousness will be devoured, your suffering exquisite. He ignored it. He focused on the port, on the small, almost invisible emergency override panel next to it. He needed to get there. He needed to open it. And then he would figure out how to bring this cosmic horror down with him. The ship bucked violently, a sudden surge of power rippling through its transformed structure. A massive antenna, now resembling a barbed tentacle, swung wildly, aimed directly at him. He pushed off the hull, propelling himself upwards, spinning through the void just as the antenna slammed into the spot where he had been. He was airborne for a terrifying moment, then slammed back onto the hull, his magnetic boots catching just in time, his breath knocked out of him. He was closer to the port now, agonizingly close. But the entity was escalating its defense. The blue light coalesced into shimmering, ethereal tendrils that snaked across the hull, trying to ensnare him. He had to move faster. He had to be smarter. He had to be willing to die. And he was. David didn't hesitate. He thrust his right arm forward, the modified multi-tool extended, its cutting laser humming a low, dangerous frequency. He aimed for the exposed conduits of the primary external power coupling, the very conduits the entity was clearly leveraging. The tendrils, sensing his intent, intensified their assault. They whipped around his limbs, not physically grasping, but generating an agonizing electromagnetic field that pulsed through his suit, making every nerve-ending scream. His vision blurred at the edges, the suit's internal diagnostics flashing critical warnings about power surges and biofeedback overload. He ignored it all. The pain was a distant hum compared to the cold, stark terror of what this entity could unleash if it gained full control. He was an astronaut, a soldier, a protector. This was his station, his ship, his crew, and he would not let it fall. With a grunt that was more primal scream than human, he activated the laser. A brilliant, focused beam of energy erupted from the tool, slicing through the vacuum. The blue tendrils recoiled, hissing with an unheard, yet palpable fury. The air inside his helmet crackled, smelling faintly of ozone. The entity was intelligent, adaptive, and now it was desperate. It struck back with a force David hadn't anticipated. A massive wave of blue light surged from the main power coupling, slamming into him. He felt like he'd been hit by a freight train. His suit's thrusters, already strained, fought against the invisible impact. He was pushed back, tumbling end over end, the vast, indifferent black of space spinning around him. His head slammed against the inside of his helmet, a blinding flash of white momentarily stealing his vision. "David! Report!" Jessica's voice, faint and distorted, crackled in his comms. He gasped, fighting for breath, the impact rattling his bones. I'm hit. It's stronger than I thought." The tendrils were closing in again, faster this time, forming a shimmering cage around him. They weren't trying to destroy his suit, they were trying to immobilize him, to overwhelm him with their electromagnetic field, to consume him. He could feel a cold, invasive presence trying to probe his mind, to find a weakness, a way in. He fought it, slamming his mental shields down, focusing only on the task. He twisted in midair, firing his thrusters wildly, barely avoiding being ensnared. He saw his target again, the exposed conduits still humming with blue light, but now protected by a thicker, more aggressive web of tendrils. He knew he couldn't just cut the power. The entity was clearly drawing power from the ship, but it was also becoming the power, merging with the ship's systems. A simple cut might just sever the ship from its own energy source, leaving them adrift and vulnerable. He needed to disrupt its connection, to overload its localized presence, to make the power coupling an uninhabitable place for it. He remembered a protocol, a last-ditch emergency measure for critical system overloads. It involved bypassing the main circuit breakers and sending a focused reverse polarity surge through a specific conduit, designed to burn out parasitic infestations or severe short circuits without damaging the primary power core. It was incredibly risky, potentially frying the entire section of the ship, including himself if done incorrectly. But it was their only shot. He had to get close. Dangerously close. He ignited his thrusters, pushing past the pain, past the fear. He plunged directly into the shimmering blue tendrils, a desperate, defiant charge. The electromagnetic feedback was excruciating. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest. He felt his blood pressure skyrocket, his heart hammering against his ribs. The internal suit alarms blared, a cacophony of red warnings. But he kept going. He was a human being, fueled by stubbornness and the will to survive. He reached the coupling, his hand shaking violently. The tendrils writhed around his arm, trying to push him away, to break his concentration. He could feel the cold, alien intelligence pressing against his mind, a wave of pure, ancient malevolence. It was trying to show him visions of cosmic horrors, of endless void, of his own insignificance. He roared, a sound lost in the vacuum but felt through the vibrations in his suit. He pushed past the mental assault, focusing on the intricate wiring, the specific conduit he needed to target. His fingers, despite the agony, moved with practiced precision. He inserted the modified multi-tool into the emergency override port, twisting it into place. "David, what are you doing? Your vitals are critical." Michael's voice, sharp with panic, cut through the static. "Executing emergency overload protocol," David gritted out, his voice strained. "Stand by for power fluctuations. Don't try to override." He felt a sudden, sharp jolt. The tendrils around him recoiled violently, their blue light flaring brighter, then dimming erratically. The entity was reacting. It knew what he was doing. It was fighting back with every ounce of its alien strength. He activated the reverse polarity search. The world exploded in a silent flash of blinding white light. Inside the Odyssey, Jessica and Michael were thrown forward as the ship shuddered violently. Lights flickered, then died, plunging the bridge into an eerie red emergency glow. Alarms blared, their shrill cries echoing through the sudden silence of the main systems. What was that? Michael yelled, clinging to his console. Power fluctuations everywhere. Life support, critical. Commencing emergency power transfer. Jessica was already at her station, her fingers flying across the auxiliary controls. External sensors are offline. I can't get a visual on David. Comms are dead. A terrifying silence descended. The only sounds were the emergency alarms and their own ragged breathing. Then, a faint, sputtering blue light began to emanate from the forward view screen, where David had been. It wasn't the hostile, tendrilled light of the entity. This was different. It was dissipating like smoke, swirling away into the void. "Michael, look," Jessica whispered, pointing. The blue light dwindled, shrinking, collapsing in on itself until it was gone. Just gone. The vast, indifferent black of space stared back at them. "David!" Jessica's voice was a desperate plea. No response. Michael was frantically trying to restore comms, his face pale. Nothing. No signal from his suit. His transponder is offline. A cold dread settled over them. Had David succeeded? Or had he been consumed by the very thing he fought? Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then a flicker. A tiny green dot appeared on Michael's auxiliary external sensor display. Wait, I'm getting something. A weak signal. Transponder ID matches Captain David. It's faint, very faint. Jessica gasped, tears welling in her eyes. He's alive. I don't know. The signal is barely there. But it's him. He's drifting away from the ship. Michael sounded relieved but also terrified. His thrusters are offline. Life support is critical but holding. Just barely. The Odyssey was damaged, limping, but the entity was gone. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Michael, with a renewed sense of purpose, began restoring auxiliary thruster power. I'm initiating a slow retrieval. It's going to take time. We're in low power mode. Jessica, still staring at the empty view screen, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. David was alive. They were alive. But then the questions began to flood her mind. What had they encountered? What was that thing? And where had it come from? As Michael painstakingly maneuvered the Odyssey to retrieve their captain, Jessica accessed the ship's damaged logs. The main power coupling was severely compromised, but the core systems were intact. The entity had been ejected or perhaps destroyed at that specific point. But then she found a series of anomalous readings in the deep space sensor logs, predating their encounter. Faint, almost imperceptible energy signatures, tracing a path not from within their solar system, but from the interstellar void beyond. They were subtle, almost like whispers in the cosmic background noise, but they were there. And they matched the energy signature of the blue light. It hadn't just appeared. It had traveled. It had been drawn to them or to something about the Odyssey. And then a chilling thought struck her, one that made her blood run cold. The other EVA suit. The one Michael had seen, the one that had been standing there just beyond the airlock. It had been the catalyst, the first sign. The entity had manifested through it, or perhaps it had created it as a way to interact, to lure. But what if it wasn't just a manifestation? What if it was a vessel? A host? They retrieved David. He was unconscious, his suit battered but alive. He would recover. The Odyssey would need extensive repairs, but it would fly again. They had survived. Yet, as they began their long, arduous journey back to Earth, a pervasive sense of unease settled over the remaining crew. The silence of space, once comforting, now felt heavy, pregnant with unseen threats. The entity was gone from their ship, but was it truly gone from the universe? Or had David merely severed a tendril of something far vaster, something incomprehensibly ancient and powerful, lurking in the interstellar darkness, waiting for another ship, another crew, another opportunity? Jessica looked at the faint, distant stars, knowing that somewhere out there, among those countless pinpricks of light, something truly alien had awakened. Something that could mimic, that could infiltrate, that could corrupt. And the thought of that other EVA suit, standing silently in the void, watching, waiting, continued to haunt her. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by stress? Or was it a sign that the entity had left a piece of itself behind? A cosmic breadcrumb, or perhaps a warning? They would tell their story. They would report what they found. But who would believe them? And even if they did, what could humanity truly do against an enemy that could manifest from light, that could travel across the void, that could wear the guise of one of their own? The journey back was fraught with repairs, rationing, and the lingering psychological impact of their encounter. David, once he recovered, spoke little of the experience, his eyes holding a new, profound understanding of the universe's darker corners. Michael was more withdrawn, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a quiet vigilance. Jessica, however, found herself drawn to the data, to the anomalies, to the questions that gnawed at her. The energy signatures, the subtle whispers from the void. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a first contact, a prelude. The crew of the Odyssey had faced down an unknown horror and survived, but they were forever changed.